Hey everybody, welcome. Today we are answering all of the questions that you guys submitted last week. So we had asked our online community to submit any question that you had about overcoming anxiety or depression or improving your mental health. We got a lot of submissions, and I'm going to be answering all the questions that we got. Also, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, go ahead and add them in here. We're live right now on Facebook and on Instagram. So if any of you guys have questions about how to overcome anxiety, depression, or improve your mental health, go ahead and submit it, and I will answer as many of these as I possibly can in the time that we have. And thanks to those of you who submitted a question in advance. So first question we have here comes from Jen Williams, who says, how can I improve my anxiety, depression, and PTSD? So Jen, I think you're pretty new to our community, if I remember correctly. What I would recommend is to, first of all, go ahead and figure out which one of those is creating the largest impact for you. I know that they can all affect each other, and they're going to have a little bit of a role to play on each other. But my advice would depend on whatever the most pressing symptom is for you. So if, for example, you're having difficulty going out and functioning due to anxiety attacks, for example, that would be the highest priority. So if you can focus just on one particular aspect, like diminishing flashbacks or increasing your motivation or decreasing anxiety attacks, if you can get a little bit more specific on a goal, I think that would be the first big advice that I would give you, because as a general rule, if you focus on an outcome that you are after with your mental health, then you will get a lot farther, as opposed to fixating on all of the things about your mental health that currently cause you frustration, right? And so that would be the first thing that I would take a look at. And since your question is very general, Jen, the first big thing I would say you really want to do is you want to map out your core 3-step pattern that is causing you anxiety, causing you depression, and causing you PTSD. So we have a full-length webinar that's available to anybody. You guys can access this. If you simply just comment below, let us know, just go ahead, put the word webinar, and we can send you, it's about a 40-minute webinar, and it walks you through how to sort of map out the initial 3 causes that are causing any negative state that you are experiencing. So if you want to do it through a webinar format, you can do it that way. Also, we provide a free mental health coaching session to every member of our community who requests one. And so if you'd like one, we can set that up as well. You can book one at mentalhealthcoaching.com or just comment below and I can help you out. Because what I would do on that call with you, Jen, is I would want to figure out either anxiety, depression, or PTSD, which one is the most prevalent, and then we would break down those 3 particular causes of the pattern more directly. I'm getting a question here live. I'm going to go ahead and take that from Sean Brudrick, I think is how I pronounce that. He says, how can you improve your anxiety to stop like it's a heart attack? Okay, so Sean, you might need to clarify just slightly. I think if I'm reading your question correctly, what you're saying is that when the anxiety comes on, maybe it feels like a heart attack, or and so you're probably dealing with some physical symptoms there, tightness in the chest, difficulty breathing, things of that nature. So also, each one of these particular subjects we have full-length trainings on as well. So I have one that's about 16 minutes that's all about how to prevent anxiety and panic attacks. If you would like that, just go ahead and put that in the comments, let me know, and myself or a team member, we're happy to reach out to you and get that over to you. But in particular with improving anxiety attacks, couple key things that you can do. So an anxiety attack is a byproduct of 3 ingredients. Okay, so there's the one ingredient, which is what is it that your mind is focused on or fixated on. So for example, typically what happens with an anxiety attack is in your mind you're going to probably either A, visualize something bad happening in the very near future, like fainting or having a heart attack or something of that nature, or B, if you don't have a brain that processes visually, then you're going to have a brain that's very oriented in terms of language and dialogue, more than likely. And so what might be happening, this would be the second ingredient, is there's a particular series of phrases that you're using inside of your mind. The most common ones with anxiety and panic attacks are I'm gonna, or this is gonna, something that is prescriptive about the future. So something like, I'm gonna faint, I'm gonna have a panic attack, I'm gonna such and such. Right? So if you can identify either A, what is it that you are visualizing or imagining is going to take place, and then B, what are you telling yourself inside of the mind, and then C, what are the changes that you make with your body. Okay, those are the three ingredients for an anxiety attack. So you can learn to train yourself to no longer engage in those three particular patterns. Okay, so it is a little challenging at first, but you can learn to take control of your physiology, your breathing, your posture, right? Things of that nature. That will have an immediate effect. You can learn to change the dialogue inside of the mind so that it is no longer habitually taking you into that anxious place. And then you can change what it is that you visualize or imagine is going to take place in the future. And then again, that webinar I mentioned for Jen would be very helpful for you. So if you'd like that, just go ahead and put that in the comments. We can get that webinar over to you. And then as always, of course, we can help you on a free coaching session as well. Okay, so let's go on to Mary Ellen Gray. This is a question we're getting here from our Facebook group. And so Mary Ellen says, living in the present and stop thinking about childhood traumas is what she's trying to do. Well, so first thing is, it is good that you have a particular specific goal, Mary Ellen. I think that's great. We, as a general rule for all of you guys to keep in mind, you'll get farther with your mental health by trying to go somewhere as opposed to trying to avoid being somewhere. So for example, if you make it your goal to live more and more in the present, then you will tend to get farther as opposed to, I need to stop thinking about childhood traumas. Okay, and some of you guys have heard me explain this before, but we call this the purple elephant phenomenon, right? So if I told you, no matter what, right now, stop thinking about a purple elephant, you'll notice that immediately the very first thing that comes to your mind is a purple elephant, right? So the more you try to resist focusing on a particular thing, the more it becomes focal. And with trauma, that becomes a very predominant experience. So when we're handling trauma, one of the key things I always keep in mind when we help our clients on this is that there's a difference between processing the trauma, right? We certainly don't want you to repress the trauma, right? Like if you feel like you're experiencing some type of unresolved pain around the trauma, we don't want you to just push that down. That would be repression, right? But we can also engage in this practice where we are essentially reliving the trauma, and it's essentially going through a repetitive pattern inside of our brain that we can actually learn to no longer enable to take place. So whenever we've actually processed the trauma, but we are just now in a position where your mind is repetitively going through it again and again, what we have to use is what we call a scrambling process. Okay, so what a scrambling process is we're going to use a literal, it's a process where we disrupt that automatic pattern that the mind goes in on a repetitive basis. So Mary Ellen, it's going to depend on if you either have a visual trauma, so if you keep reliving it like a picture or a movie inside of your head, or if you're having the trauma repeat to itself in an auditory way, so if you keep reliving like the sounds or what people said to you during that experience, there's a different scrambling process for that. And then third, if it's a kinesthetic trauma, so if you feel more associated to pain inside of your nervous system and your body, then we have a different process for getting rid of that. But to give you kind of the short version is if you want to learn how to scramble it, let's say it's a visual and auditory. Those are the most common ones for trauma. So if you keep reliving that trauma in a visual way, and then you also have sounds associated with it, what you want to try to do is you want to start to practice manipulating we call them submodalities, but essentially what you're going to do is you're going to start to practice changing the picture or the images and the sounds. So as a general rule, okay, when your mind is going through images and sounds, if it's doing them at a very fast pace, if you slow them down, 9 times out of 10, that will reduce the pain that you're experiencing. So you can actually learn how to slow that down inside of the mind. What you can also do is if there's a particular tone of the voice, so if you remember someone yelling at you or screaming at you or something like that, what you can do is actually practice turning the volume down inside your mind. So as you hear it, you consciously direct the volume to be lower, And as you lower the volume, almost always that will reduce the emotional pain. One other tip with visualization is we call it whiting out. So if you have a particular trauma that is returning to you in a visual way, what you can do is you can practice whiting it out. And what I do with our clients is it helps if you imagine that you have like a dial out in front of you, like, you know, one of those old school TVs, and you imagine kind of like reaching out, grabbing the dial, and then turning the dial, and then that changes the volume or that whites out the image. So that would be kind of like a starter kit if you're having trouble moving on past traumas. But the other tip I would give you as well, for all of you guys, if you feel like you're having difficulty moving on from a painful past experience, is remember that you're never going to do it by doing the purple elephant thing, right? What you have to do is you have to get your mind fixated on things completely unrelated to the trauma. We call this therapeutic deletion, right? So for example, if any of you guys remember, maybe you had like a boyfriend or a girlfriend in like middle school, you were really in love with them, you thought they were going to be your husband or wife or whatever, and then it just didn't work out, right? As 99% of middle school relationships don't. Well, at the time, you were totally in love with them, right? Like you thought you were going to have this whole life together. And maybe you were all broken up about it for a while. Why? Because you kept focusing on it, right? You kept focusing on that purple elephant, so to speak. But then came a day where somebody else got your attention. You were flirting with somebody else, or you went to high school, or you moved towns, or whatever, right? And your focus went somewhere else. And now that I'm saying this to you on this video, you're like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot I was madly in love with that person in middle school, right? Because you've deleted it, right? But you didn't delete it by continuously focusing on how in love you were. You deleted it by focusing on other things. That's what we call therapeutic deletion. So it's not so much usually the case that we need to continuously reprocess the trauma. It's usually the case that we have to train your brain to actually be in the present and focusing on the future. And then the trauma becomes therapeutically deleted, not repressed, but you end up moving on with your life, okay? That would be kind of the big thing. I've got a comment coming in live here from Cheyenne. Cheyenne says, how can you figure out your triggers when it seems like you don't have any and the anxiety comes randomly? So Cheyenne, I think your question is well-intentioned. You're obviously trying to improve the anxiety in particular. This is a very common idea that's been around for a long time of identifying your triggers. I actually do not do this with our clients because your trigger is not the source of the problem. Okay, the source of the problem is you have a conditioned pattern of response in the nervous system. Okay, and that may be triggered by very identifiable triggers, or it may simply sort of pop up through simple conditioning. So what I would encourage you to do is, instead of trying to identify your triggers, especially if it seems random, I don't think that's going to be a very fruitful line of thought for you. What would be better would be to utilize what I shared a little while ago about the 3 ingredients, because there is a 3-step process for every emotion that any of you guys are experiencing. And so there's sort of a formula for what creates anxiety, a formula for what creates depression, a formula for what creates confidence. It's a 3-step process. So you can take the advice I was giving a little earlier in the live. I would recommend you try to decode your particular pattern of anxiety, not the triggers, but the pattern that is happening in response to the triggers, because the pattern is the problem, not the triggers. And again, if you want that webinar, just let us know in the comments. We can get that over to you. Or if you haven't done a free coaching session with me yet, we can set one up. And I'm happy to walk that through with you directly. Live question we're getting from Kristen. Kristen says, does anxiety cause chest pain and lightheadedness? Yes. Yep, absolutely. Those are very common. And in particular, if you have chronic chest pain and chronic headaches, almost always, if we reduce the anxiety, it will reduce those physical symptoms. But a lot of times people get this confused. I want to add something about this because people will often say, well, I need to get rid of these physical symptoms. Right? But that line of thinking tends to just spiral people out even worse and make things not so great. So what is better is, again, focus on the 3-ingredient pattern of anxiety, which, by the way, we got a lot of people with anxiety here, so I might as well just give you guys the basics. Okay, anxiety comes about through 3 simple steps. Now, if you're taking any notes, here's what I always do with our clients, right? I always have our clients create a table or a grid. So you'd want it to be 3 columns, so up and down, and then 4 rows across, okay? And so the middle column, you would label anxiety at the top. And then the right column, you would label with like content or happiness or whatever it is that you want to feel instead. Excuse me. And there are those 3 ingredients that cause every emotion. So the first one is what we fixate or focus on, is what we call it. So that was kind of what I was talking about before, right? What creates anxiety is focusing on one particular thing, which is the future that you fear, right? You can only feel anxiety in the human nervous system by focusing on the future that you fear. Now, I know that sounds kind of commonsensical, but here's the important thing. There is an infinite number of things you can focus on instead. The reason why your mind is going to the future that you fear, the future that you fear, the future that you fear, is because it's become conditioned to do that. So what creates content? 2 ways to create content, feeling content or joy. 1, focus on the future that you desire. Number 2, focus on the present and what you appreciate about the present. So what you can do is start to train the brain to no longer look in this direction and look over here. And that will feel like a challenge at first. But as you start to do it over and over and over again, your mind will feel more tempted to want to stay in the pleasant mode than the painful mode. But it takes a couple of weeks to really master that. So one thing you could start doing, Cheyenne, would be to say, what can I appreciate in the present moment, and try to find like 3 or 4 things. That's a simple little way you can do it. But what I've found is more powerful is if your mind is visualizing things going badly in the future. What you want to practice and work to do is visualizing it going how you want it to go in the future. If you find that your mind processes more in terms of dialogue, so if it's saying things like, I'm going to have a heart attack, what you want to use is you want to simply hijack that language pattern and turn it into a positive. So I'm going to have a good day. I'm going to have a great evening. I'm going to do well at work, right? And as you start to change those patterns, you start to feel how you want to feel, right? So focus is the first big one, language is the second big one, and then physiology. So there's a particular type of focus that creates anxiety, a particular type of language that creates anxiety, and then a particular way of moving our physical body that creates anxiety, right? And so you got to learn to take control of those 3 elements, and you can get rid of the anxiety, okay? It takes a couple months to master that, but it can be done. Okay, let's see what else we got. I'm going to keep going here with our questions that were submitted before, but if you guys have any questions you want to submit live, go ahead. Lee said, I have overwhelming anxiety all the time. Lee, I wish you would have submitted a more specific question, unfortunately, but I've already talked a lot about kind of where to get started if you're brand new to trying to get your anxiety in check, okay? But just keep in mind, anybody can get anxiety out of their life. It just requires you learning the skills and systems to get it done, okay? Jordan says, guilt and social anxiety. Okay, so Jordan, what I would say there would be the big thing that you want to start to take a look at is your anxiety would be caused by what we call an external frame of reference. Okay, so an external frame of reference is when we evaluate our self-worth only through the imagined opinions of people outside of us, right? And so it can also be not just the opinions of other people, but this is also when, for example, if any of you guys have this anxiety around like being productive or achieving enough or something of that nature, that would be what we call an external frame of reference as well, as in you're wanting some box to be checked outside of yourself in order for you to then feel good enough inside of yourself. And so the trick to getting rid of that particular type of anxiety in the long term is you have to learn how to have an internal frame of reference where you are validating your own sense of self-worth by a different criteria, by a criteria that is easier for you to control, right? Because we will feel anxiety in direct proportion to how much we require things that are outside of our control to be in our control. So it is going to be challenging at first, but what you might want to start to do is think, okay, well, wait a minute, how do I want to live my life? Right? What are the actions that I want to be taking? How do I want to be moving forward in my life? What kind of person do I want to be? And try to evaluate that from a more internal based standpoint, and that will kind of get you going in the right direction. Okay, and as always, we can help you further if you need some additional help. But if you're going forward on your own, then that's where you want to start on that. Okay, let's see. Sarah, we got a live question coming in from Kristen again. I get really bad anxiety when I'm driving. So Kristen, I've been dealing with agoraphobic individuals a lot ever since COVID happened, and driving phobias in particular. I actually filmed a more full-length video on how we helped 3 people recently get over anxiety around driving. So if you'd like that video, just go ahead and let me know in the comments, and a team member or myself, we can get that to you, because that would probably be very valuable for you. But the big thing with driving anxiety I have found is that typically it's a very high likelihood, and you can let me know in the comments if this is true, but it's a very high likelihood that you have a concept of a safe space. So that you kind of use that language or that metaphor inside of your head of like, well, this is my safe space and this is not my safe space, right? Something like that. And so the trick is one of two things. Either A, you want to stop using the language of safe space, because when you, essentially what happens is when you define one area as your safe space, what you're inherently convincing yourself of is that everywhere else is somehow unsafe. That's why the anxiety is taking place. And remember that I've said this before in many other videos and trainings, but it's important to remember, anything we repeat to ourselves enough times, we will eventually believe, whether it's true or not. So when you keep telling yourself, well, this is my safe space, this is my safe space, what you're convincing your brain of is that anywhere else is unsafe. And that's where the anxiety comes from. So either A, you want to get rid of that safe space language, or B, there's a particular internal mental process you can do to expand your safe space. But that is like a 15-minute thing. So I don't have the time to do that right now. But again, if you want additional help, we're happy to help you, okay? All right, let's see. Sarah Roach says, how can I get over my PTSD, OCD, depression, and anxiety? Okay, so this is a lot like that question I got earlier. I would say, Sarah, what you really want to ask yourself instead, because firstly, guys, one way you can increase anxiety for yourself is by trying to solve a problem that you have defined in unsolvable terms, or you've defined the problem in terms that makes it way more complicated than it needs to be. So what I mean by that is that particular question, Sarah, is very well intentioned, right? But when you're asking, how can I get over this and this and this and this, that's going to automatically feel probably very overwhelming to you, and that itself will cause further anxiety. So what I would recommend you do instead is ask yourself, okay, what is the number one pattern that I need to get rid of? Like, is it that I'm having a flashback? Is it that I'm obsessing over checking everything in my house 12 times? Is it that I am staying in bed all day and feeling depressed? Is it that I'm having anxiety attacks, right? Figure out what is the sort of like more micro pattern that you need help with, and then please let us know what the answer to that is, because we can get you specific trainings and advice depending on what that particular micro pattern is, okay? Let's see, Brenda Brenda Gordon says, healthier ways to express anger and frustration. So Brenda, good to see you on here. I know that you're about 2 months into our program. So one thing on the anger and frustration there, Brenda, that would be important to keep in mind is that anger comes about because of violated rules. So rules are a particular type of belief about how we think things should be. So for anybody dealing with anger and frustration, here's a little simple exercise you can do, is think about the person you're getting angry with. And then what you would want to do is you would want to list out answers to, or like essentially finish this sentence, right? So think about the person you're angry at and say, essentially like, my brother should, okay, keyword should, ... and then fill in the blank, right? My brother should call me more often. My brother should never criticize me, right? And you want to get all of those shoulds out on paper. And that itself can sometimes diminish anger, because you can sometimes get things out on paper and you're like, some of this doesn't make sense, right? And then what you'd want to do is you want to challenge some of those rules. So you want to go, okay, well, wait a minute. Is that really true? That's the key question you want to use. Is that really true? Yes or no? Is it really true that my brother needs to call me 3 times a week? Is it really true? Etc. Etc. Okay, and that will help you start to evaluate which rules you want to modify or what rules you want to get rid of, and that's always the fastest path to getting rid of anger. We very often think that the way to solve anger is by getting the other person to change, but remember that getting the other person to change is something that's outside of your control. And if you focus on what's outside of your control, that's itself another way to get angry and frustrated. So we always want to turn it more internally. We want to take the power back and put it in your hands to create a good life for yourself. Okay. All right, let's keep going. We've got Victoria. Victoria says night anxiety, especially when you live alone. So Victoria, what's probably going on there is you have some embedded beliefs that you are unsafe in some particular way, that you are somehow safer when you're with somebody as opposed to without somebody. It's more than likely that your mind is creating some of that future plus fear patterns we talked about, where you're like visualizing or imagining that something bad took place. And so that would be, you want to utilize the things that I shared already a little bit earlier to figure out what your particular pattern is. What you could also do, this is a good framework that any of you guys can use, is you can ask yourself, okay, wait a minute, what would I have to believe in order to feel this way when I'm alone? And just write down the very first answer that comes to you, and then ask that same question several times until you feel like you get all of the limiting beliefs out on paper, and then ask yourself for each one of those limiting beliefs, is that really true? Right? And that will help you as well, okay? Another question from Cheyenne coming in live. Cheyenne says, how do I deal with anxiety while I'm at work? So Cheyenne, if you can let me know, is the anxiety due to you're worried about other people's opinion of you, or is the anxiety due to you feel overwhelmed with your tasks at work? Because the answer is different depending on which one of those. Let's see. Let me know and I'll come back to you in a second. Rich says, how to handle angry people. Okay, well, Rich, that question is very, very general, so it's tough for me to provide a very specific answer on that. The answer might depending on if it's a spouse of yours or if it's a parent, or, there's lots of different dynamics there, because if it's a spouse, you need to handle it one way. If it's a parent, probably a different way. The first thing that you can do is you want to role model the correct communication style as much as you possibly can, which is a little easier said than done. But that's always the very first thing that you would want to do. There's also something that you would want to do, which is become aware of what we call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. That is a communication framework that comes from John Gottman. Very, very powerful. We use this in our relationship program. But if you can get an understanding of those 4 horsemen, what you might be doing without knowing it is you might be enacting a couple communication styles that might be eliciting anger from people without you knowing it. And so that's something we can take a look at. If you or anybody else would like some more detail on the 4 horsemen, let us know and we can get you guys a training on that. Cheyenne says, it's the fact that I'm not at home in my safe place. Right. Okay. So the reason why you're feeling anxiety there, Cheyenne, is you're defining home as a safe place and work, therefore, as a non-safe place. Right. So you will continue to feel anxiety until you start to change the belief about what work is. And so chances are, I don't know all the details of your work, but I'm assuming that your work, like if you're continuing to work in that job, presumably it is an actually legitimately safe place. It's just that you don't currently feel safe there, right? And so remember, what we repeat to ourselves, we believe. What we believe, we feel. So even if it is safe at work, if you keep telling yourself it's not, then that's how you're going to feel. So that would be the first immediate place to start, is start changing how you talk to yourself about your work, and you will change how you feel about your work. Okay, Michelle Lynn. Michelle, I know you just joined our program yesterday, so congratulations on that. Michelle says, how do I change my thoughts around social anxiety? I tend to get so nervous that my face gets red when I am in a conversation. It becomes directed towards me. I'm working on reprogramming my thoughts around social interactions, but still have times where it happens out of nowhere. So, Michelle, what you're going to learn in the very first video is a very detailed, in-depth way to dissect the three elements of your pattern. So that's where you really want to start with that. And then I also want you to keep in mind the thing I said about the internal frame of reference as opposed to the external frame of reference, because in the short term, what you need to do to get rid of the social anxiety is to focus on those three elements that we talked about and shifting those. So shifting what you focus on, shift what you tell yourself, shift what you do with your physiology. In the long term, to keep social anxiety out of your life, what we need to do is you're going to need to evaluate and update what we call your model of the world, right? So as opposed to evaluating your self-worth from the lens of the outside in, we want you to learn how to play the game of life from the inside out, which is something you'll learn in sort of the latter couple of modules there when we take you through the values process, okay? Cheyenne says, I clean different homes every day, so I'm in a different place with different people. Okay, that makes sense, Cheyenne. So again, basic principle of what I just said, though, would still apply, right? So the reason you'd be feeling the way that you're feeling is that you have a belief about those places. So what you might want to do is ask yourself, okay, what would I need to believe in order to feel how I'm feeling in each one of those places? And then what you want to do is you want to learn how to challenge those beliefs, right? And that's about a 9-step process, but the very first step that can start you on that is that really true, yes or no? And just challenge those beliefs, and that will help you start to loosen the anxiety up. Lynn Marguerite says, how to deal with social anxiety. Lynn, just please see what I just said to Michelle. Sydney says, how to experience mania without the awful crash. So Sydney, what you're probably experiencing there is something we call the crazy 8. The crazy 8 essentially is what happens whenever there is some type of a mood swing, or there's a high and a low, or something of that nature is going on. The crazy 8 takes place because your nervous system craves variety. So we can only stay in one particular emotional state for a certain amount of time, and then it's a very natural urge for the nervous system to crave getting into a different mode. What happens with that crazy 8 is that then you're going to experience a desire to go like down and out of the crazy 8 through destructive habits. So just trying to distract yourself, or drink or smoke or do something to just kind of change where your headspace is at. The trick is to figure out how to go up and out of the crazy 8. The way to go up and out is to change what you focus on. In particular, you'd want to start to train your brain to go, well, wait a minute, how do I want the future to go? So if you're waking up in the morning, you'd want to start to try to imagine and visualize, how do I want the day and the afternoon to go? Okay, something of that nature. We got some questions coming in from Instagram here. Allie says, what about the thought of getting in a plane flight? I'm so afraid of getting an anxiety attack. I'm assuming you're talking about traveling. So firstly, Allie, we literally just had a client graduate from our program whose biggest fears were social anxiety and travel anxiety. And so we did a full interview. We got a lot of good takeaways out of that. So that was with our client. Her name is Janelle. If you would like access to that, just go ahead and comment Janelle, and I'm happy to get that interview over to you, because I think that'll give you a lot of really good things to think about. Two big things I've found helping people overcome travel anxiety is travel anxiety tends to come about either one of two reasons. One, you're again visualizing or using internal dialogue to tell yourself that something bad is going to happen in the near future. So imagining the plane crashing, or something like that, getting pulled out of the TSA line, something of that nature. The second type of travel anxiety I have found is when you're overly fixated on the process. So you're fixated on essentially like, well, I got to go to the airport, and then I got to get in TSA line, and then I got to take my shoes off, and then I got to do this, and and it becomes this like several dozen like series of steps. And so that's what we call over chunking, where in your brain you're like coming up with like this big long list of things, and that's what can create overwhelm and anxiety. So what you want to do in travel anxiety is you want to focus on the desired outcome. That would be the simplest little tip I can give you to start. So if you process things visually, you want to start to visualize the travel going smoothly And in particular, imagine like getting to your end destination and enjoying your end destination. Would be kind of what we would want to do with that. That would be kind of the simplest way to get started with there. Okay, let's see. Let me check here and see if we got other questions from Instagram. We had somebody who says, I get anxiety a lot. Yoga helps. Yeah, we talked a lot about anxiety today, so that was pretty helpful. So, all right, I think I covered all the questions, guys. But as always, go ahead, drop a comment if you have any questions you need to. And as always, we provide a completely, totally free 30-minute coaching session for every member of our online community who wants one, so long as you commit to showing up. We give you that one free coaching session. There's no ask on the call. There's no pitch on the call. It's literally just me helping you out for 30 minutes. So if you would like that, just go ahead and comment free session, and I can message you, or a team member of mine can message you. We'll find a time that works for you. We'll put that on the calendar and we'll help you out. Why do we do that, by the way? We get that question a lot, like, well, why are you giving a free coaching session? Well, I'll tell you very simply, because I hate sales and marketing, and I would rather just help you so that way you can see that what I can teach you will actually work for you. And I know that either A, you're going to want to work with me more if it really works for you, or B, even if you don't want to work with me, that's fine, but then I still get to help you out, and then, you'll probably have good things to say and you'll recommend what we do to other people. So I just like to prove to you that we can help you by surprise actually helping you. So that's how we do things. So if you'd like a free session, anybody go ahead and do that. Just comment free session and we will be happy to set one up for you guys. But otherwise, mark your calendars. I do these live streams in our communities, in our Facebook group and on Instagram now every week at 2 o'clock Eastern time. So if you want to tune into our future live streams and get your questions answered, then we'll be happy to help you, okay? Thanks for being a part of the community, everybody, and talk to you guys soon. Bye.